Right, sorry bro, I had to go get a fucking drink. My throat was proper dry. Oh, gotta lay off them seas, ain't I? But back to where we were. I think I've more or less wrapped it up there. I think that'll probably do it for this little video. God, I feel like I'm doing like a fucking YouTube channel or something. That's more or less all there is to my trade. So if you wanted to take a look at this one yourself at a gold sell, I'll tell you what, we'll have a look at GU Warrior, because I think I'm in a buy for that one. That's the one. So the daily, again, I always check the daily for any trade just because you can see the general overview of where price is moving. So looking at this one, I can see a trend emerging here. It's not confirmed just yet because, like I said, it's the 3-point confirmation we need really. But looking at that, it looks quite strong. So again, the 20 has come, it's crossed the 50, it's come back to the 50. Look at all these candlesticks, so indecisive. They don't know where they're going at the moment. The buyers and the sellers are completely cancelling each other out. But if you look at the trend line as well, it's all looking like it's rejecting this key zone that I think you talk about. So here I'm really looking for quite a strong buy. It could go all the way up to the 1.27 mark, but I think I've got a 1.26 just because when it comes to rejecting these price lines, they're not always 100% confident. They might not reach it completely. It might come close. So just for the sake of, I don't want it to skyrocket and then fall back down, because I've set my take profit too high. So I've set it around the 1.26. So that's about that's about 290 pips. That would be. So that'd be a great swing trade. And I think, JC, I'm going to wrap it up there. That should be all from me. I've got AIM come round, so she might even be here now actually. So I'll wrap it up there. Obviously hit me up with any questions, leave them in the comment section below, you know how it is. Hopefully that's explained a few things, so I'll leave it there. Good luck, JC.